Welcome everybody joining the call. We're just giving a minute or so for people to log on. And while we're waiting, please feel free, if you feel comfortable, to add in where you're coming from, your organization, add that to your name. As you can see, I'm Trina from WWF. Okay, I've just informed you can't change your name, so don't try to do that. At least don't be frustrated if you can't. Just keep your name as it is. That's perfect. And I think people are coming in, but we can slowly start since it's a few minutes past the hour. Welcome everybody again. My name is Trina. I'm from WWF Denmark, Climate Advisor. Very happy to welcome you today for this WWF event in the context of the Asia Pacific Regional Climate Week. At this event today, this 1 hour, we will explore how the extent to which the NDCs from countries in the Asia Pacific reflect the necessary ambition for 1.0 pathway for a resilient world. And we will explore in particular, with the input from the speakers, opportunities and potentials for enhancing the NDC ambition, the implementation in terms of national leadership, regional coordination, and also the role of non-state actors. And we'll hopefully also get some pointers on what are the key sectors we might be focusing on moving forward. So in addition to working for WWF Denmark, I have actually been living for many years in the Southeast Asia. And I'm happy to be moderating today and hear experiences and ideas from across the region. A region, Asia Pacific, which is very important for the world actually to achieve the climate ambition and action needed, given the extent, given that the region is so large and also very diverse. So I'm also happy that the speakers today represent a very diverse set of stakeholders. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jerome Iligan, who's Chief of Policy Research Division in the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. And we have Dr. Luo, who's the Vice Chair of the China Asian Research Institute at the Guangxi University. And then we have Mrs. No Yi Min, who's the Director of the Myanmar CSO Point, which stands for Promotion of Indigenous and Nature Together Point. And she's also an Executive Council member of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, AIPP. So welcome very much to all the speakers. We will also have some input from my colleague Shirley and Shun, which I will also introduce later. So welcome everybody, and welcome to all the participants as well. In the meeting, I'll be inviting input, and I'll be asking questions to the presenters, to the speakers, and you, the participants, can also write questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to make sure that we have your questions answered to the extent time allows. So hopefully from today we can really get some concrete ideas for how can we push further the ambition and implementation of the NDCs. And to frame that discussion, I would first like to invite my colleague, Shirley Mattison, who's the Global NDC Enhancement Coordinator, to officially launch our regional NDC report and to give us the frame for this discussion of the event today. So the floor is yours, Shirley, please.
Thank you, Trina. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this event. I'm taking a few moments here to launch the report. our regional report looking at Asia Pacific NDCs. But my aim is to very briefly whet your appetite and invite you to go and have a look at the report in more detail. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming discussion, so I'm hoping not to take too much time. But yes, as Trina said, today we're launching our regional report, which looks at new and updated NDCs submitted to the Asia Pacific region and provides guidelines to decision makers in the region. So great. Let me first talk about our analytical framework and WWF's approach to NDC enhancement. So we have an NDC we want checklist, which sets out our principles for increased ambition in new and updated NDCs. So it's across 5 areas and we have 20 points of criteria. The checklist is available on our website and I will share the link to that after this presentation. But this is really looking at all the areas that we see as important when looking at ambition across enhancing NDCs. This is designed to be a qualitative assessment. So WWF looks at NDCs, new and enhanced NDCs submitted against this criteria. And after we consider them, we assign an overall rating, which you can see an example on the right there, which ranges from green, which is an NDC we want, down to pink, which is, we would say, an NDC we don't want, or one that we hope that would be updated before COP26. So just here as an illustration, we have all 5 criteria, looking across points such as ambition, how do NDCs consider systemic change, how inclusive and what's the participation in the development of the NDC and climate policy at a national level, how does it integrate across other thematic areas, including the Sustainable Development Goals and include nature-based solutions, and what's in there and tracking progress, thinking broadly about how this is contributing to the Paris Agreement. And you will see that I've also added in a criteria 6 there on the green economy, which is not part of our official checklist, but is a really important aspect, certainly emerging over the past year or so. So that's something that we're also considering. And this was our analytical framework for the report. So what we did was across the 6 criteria, we looked at submitted NDCs on the Asia Pacific region to see, you know, what was the story across each of these points, and what can we say in terms of lessons learned, what interesting examples were coming out that other countries can potentially find inspiring or helpful as they think about their NDC development. And we also included recommendations, which were really sort of analysis and conclusions, saying, you know, for countries that are yet to submit their NDCs, this is something to think about. And for countries which are resubmitting their NDCs, like Kyrgyzstan and Japan, ahead of COP26, these are some points that we recommend you think about from a regional perspective. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail in terms of the specific outputs of the report. I want to encourage you to go and have a look. And like I say, I will provide a link to this in the report. So I think rather than go into detail across all of this criteria, at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about the broad reflections. So I think it comes as no surprise, but certainly diversity across the region is something that is very apparent. So we're talking about a region which ranges from Russia in the west and Fiji in the east. It includes the 3rd largest economy in the world, Japan, but also includes, for example, the Marshall Islands, which is 188th. So the diversity is very apparent, and that's something that which we think is certainly can be celebrated. And within the reports, we include a range of case studies looking at specifically nature-based solutions as an example of how diversity across the region really comes out through NDC development. So for example, we talk a bit about Fiji, and the updated NDC there, which is including within its scope the ocean sector. So really they recognize the importance of blue nature-based solutions and mainstreaming the blue economy ambitions within the NDC. So for example, a specific target was to allocate 30% of its exclusive economic zones as marine protected areas and work towards 100% sustainable management by 2030. Another example, which I encourage you to have a look at, is the Singapore case study, which is really interesting because it looks at urban nature-based solutions and coastal nature-based solutions. So given its vulnerability, that's something that Singapore has integrated into its long-term adaptation planning. And examples of this include, since 2017, the Cooling Singapore project has been researching solutions to address the urban heat challenge, including considering the roles for nature-based solutions. So aside from this diversity, I think one of the other things that we wanted to highlight is that there's an awful lot of opportunity for cooperation and joint wins, and that's something that is quite an exciting aspect of the Asia Pacific development with regards to climate action and NDC development. So just lastly, a couple of examples there include, for example, WWF, the World Resources Institute, and HSBC have recently launched the Climate Solutions Partnership, which is aiming to unlock barriers for finance for companies and projects that are tackling climate change. And in Asia Pacific, it's spanning across 14 markets. So from Australia to China to Vietnam to India. So it's a really diverse region, and it's aiming to mobilize $50 million from HSBC across 3 work streams. So exploring cooperation across the energy transition, nature-based solutions, and business innovation. So really there's that kind of two aspects of diversity and cooperation, which really come out as interesting areas to look out for in the Asia Pacific region. So yeah, like I say, please do have a look at the report and see how it can be helpful to your work. Lastly, I think one more slide just to say that this report is one in a series that WWF is doing, looking at from the regional perspective and feeding into regional climate weeks. What is the story around NDCs and what are the recommendations for decision makers? So in case this is also relevant to your work, on the website, you will find the Latin America and Caribbean analysis, which has a very interesting conclusions around specifically inclusivity and participation, but follows the same format as the Asia Pacific one. And September, we will be coming out with a third report looking at the Africa region and launching that at the Africa Regional Climate Week. So I think I will leave it there. My contact details are here. I'm the Global NDC Enhancement Coordinator at WWF. I will put these also in the chat, and very welcome to get in touch with us if you want to talk more about what we're doing on NDC enhancement in Asia Pacific or globally. And I will also put a link to our website. Our report will be up there later today, and please do have a look. That's it for me, so I'm going to hand back to you, Trina.
Yes, thank you very much, Shirley, for just giving us that overview of a very diverse and broad region. And it's good to see that there are certainly some countries that are really leaping forward and taking the lead in having both ambitious NDCs, implementing those, and also starting to include new sectors, and in particular also the case study on nature-based solutions. But it's also clear that there is still need for a lot of action and for increased ambition in the region, and I'm therefore very happy to invite from the Philippines Mr. Jerome, Chief Policy from the Research Division from the Philippines Climate Change Commission, to share with us some insights from the experience from the Philippines. And maybe Mr. Jerome, you could start out to just give us a little bit of an insight on what has been the approach in the Philippines with regards to development of your NDC, what has been the opportunities, and maybe some highlights from domestic successes in terms of both developing and implementing, starting the implementation of the NDC, because I think that's where you are are well ahead. So please share with us your experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, WWF and colleagues and other participants. It's been an eye-opener for me that this is not a usual presentation because I know the countries will be graded. So let me just reiterate that in terms of ambition, fostering systemic change, inclusiveness and participation, contribution to SDGs, the tracking system and green recovery. We are pleased to share that we have all these elements. It's just that we want to convey that we just submitted our NDC last April 15, and I would like to share how we did that. And this is a combination of science, policy, and practice concerning low carbon development, linking that to sustainable development, but largely it is a reflection of our national capacity to define where we want to go from where we are, and defining the policies and measures of NDC, constituting the answers to the question, how do we get there? And so for my share of insights this afternoon, I'm going to share the unique approach of the Philippines in NDC development and implementation. What's the approach of the Philippines in the NDC development that have been highlighting the opportunities and perhaps a domestic success, which will measure the progression of our NDC implementation. And of course, what is the opportunity of NDC's domestic recovery from COVID-19? These are some of the crucial questions, all relevant, all brilliant. But to start off, the NDC, before our submission, we made sure that the whole of government and whole of society approach is adopted, which means to say that NDC is not standalone government instrument. It is actually a societal document informing the stakeholders, those who are intending to be benefited and those that are expected to contribute, those that are supposed to be accountable in galvanizing convergent measures in terms of policies, the technological innovation towards our modernization of the emitting sectors so that we contribute effectively to the global goal of 1.5 degrees. Incidentally, the National Framework Strategy of Climate Change in the Philippines has the following emitting sectors: with FE, A, agriculture, waste, I, industry, T, transport, F, forestry, and the last is energy. But the determination of the contributing sectors in the Philippine NDC has undergone economic modeling analysis plus emission avoidance analysis benchmarked against the 2010 greenhouse gas inventories of the Philippines. Our NDC focuses on mitigation, focuses on the sectors of energy, agriculture, transport, and industrial processes and waste in our first submission. But nonetheless, there are a lot of adaptation measures that are also highlighted in the NDC. Now we are articulating this because we strike a balance of committing to mitigation commitments or mitigation objectives, but we have to increase as well our adaptive communities, given that the Philippines, while we are a less emitting nation, we suffer more in terms of climate change impacts. And so we work around the core principles of climate justice in that regard, making sure that NDC gains should benefit our vulnerable community, so to speak, in terms of increased adaptation, but technologies for pursuing our industries and services, so that we realize that NDC is our opportunity to transform our economy with the intention of, on one hand, contributing to global goal of 1.5, but at the same time measuring up to the adaptive requirements or adaptation needs of our country. And therefore, we crafted the NDC having been informed by national circumstances. We have gathered data from authoritative sources in government, trying to figure out the needed shifts in terms of socioeconomic development, and of course, technology needs assessments in terms of what would be needed in those sectors to be able to lower down or avoid our projected emissions by 2030. We do this employing the latest scientific advice, say from the IPCC, but tailor-fitted with regard to the climate projections as espoused, for example, by the National Panel of Technical Experts. Now, in inclusion and participation, we conducted 2 multi-stakeholder consultations and we listened to their feedback. One of the highlights is increasing the ambition. It is noted that under the INDC, the Philippines committed only to -70, but in our first NDC, we are now committing to -75. But 72.29% is for the conditional component and 2.71% is for the unconditional component. For us, it's already systemic change because under the INDC, it's all unconditional. It's all conditional. Now in the NDC, the government would account for at least 2.71%, but we will be increasing this as we are progressing towards the implementation of the policies and measures that we can generate out of a support under the means of implementation. Now, what are the opportunities that we can speak of? We adopted a framework that our NDC sectors would be contributing to economy-wide mitigation or emission avoidance strategy. That means to say that our sectors having interfaces with each other, especially when we speak of energy transition, energy informs the other sectors, and of course the modernization in terms of technological shifts to clean energy, for example, will be considered. So that's going to be monitored using an MRV system exclusively for the NDC, but providing entry points that sustainable development objectives are also met. Earlier this day, and this is part of the perhaps adjustments that we are doing, our policies and measures will constitute not just the technology activities, but it will also compute for the projected mitigation potential of those technologies, but at the same time linking the development outcomes to SDGs to make sure that our national policy and planning and even budgeting will be informed by our NDC. So this is actually a work in progress, and we are planning as government to really package a whole set of negotiation document wherein the Philippines will really outline what we intend to do in terms of policies and measures constituting support for the conditional portion. But we are also scheduling already how to touch base with non-government actors like the private sector, who should be joining with us in terms of investment to technologies supporting energy transition, waste management, modernized agriculture, using low carbon irrigation system, for example, in cold value chain that we can distribute to subnational levels. It's important that the proof of concept of the NDC is really relatable to the people that we serve, because by and large, we are anticipating shocks that we need to avert, minimize, address, not just through mitigation, but an accountable, cohesive, and transparent adaptation measure. So I think I could stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jerome, for sharing in a very short time a very rich experience from the Philippines. I certainly think that most participants will look more deeply into to what you have done, but good to hear in terms of the balancing of mitigation and adaptation, and really having the incentive also for people to benefit from an ambitious NDC in terms of benefiting from increased or reduced climate vulnerability on their side. I think we'll come back to that. There was a question on that. What is really the motivation for people to join and support the NDCs? And then your very multi-sector or very inclusive or comprehensive NDC in terms of including so many sectors and really integrating it into the economic plans of the nation. I think that's key. And of course, we have these socioeconomic developments plans or the likes across the region. And then, so looking really economy-wide framework, and you mentioned in the end, this focus on the importance of energy transition. And I think that's a good point to link on to the next speaker, Dr. Luo, from the Vice Chair of the China Asian Research Institute, because questions for you is coming more in terms of potential for regional cooperation, and really would like to hear from you. From your background in research, you know, where do you see opportunities for regional approaches across the Asia Pacific? Maybe some specific opportunities or challenges in terms of energy transition, and how can you see this support NDC implementation across the region? So three small questions for you. Over to you, please, Dr. Luo.
Thank you, Chile. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay, so thank you for being invited to share my opinion. Thank you, WFF arrangements. I want to share some opinions from the regional cooperation. Compared to the situation in the development countries, there are many opportunities for cooperation in this Asian Pacific region. Taking ASEAN countries as an example, the electricity demands of ASEAN countries is growing at average annual rates of 6%, which is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. Since 2000, the hydropower generation in this region has tripled. According to the 2016 to 2025 ASEAN Energy Cooperation Plan, ASEAN has set an overall regional goal that renewable energy will account for 23% of the primary energy structure by 2025. However, the current proportion of renewable energy in the region nowadays can only reach about 15%. Therefore, the region has great potential for the development of renewable energy, especially after the epidemic COVID-19. Most member economies attach greater importance on the development and utilization of renewable energy, and the energy transition in this region is accelerating. In my opinion, the most critical challenge lies in the dilemma faced by those decision makers among the Southeast Asian countries. Due to the rapid economic development of East Asia countries, the energy supply of Southeast Asia countries can fulfill their energy demand. Thus, a complete energy supply chain has been established in the Asia Pacific region. For this reason, the development of fossil energy has been regarded as the most important payroll industry by many Southeast Asia countries, both in the national income and those citizens' welfare. However, many of the ASEAN countries realize that they rely too much on their energy industry and try to carry out the economic diversification plan, as Mr. Jerome said. At the same time, in recent years, as Southeast Asian countries has increasingly becoming the popular and hot destinations for investments, especially from East Asia countries, or regions. Cheap power resources are also an crucial factor in attracting foreign investments, which has also increased the demand for power energy in Southeast Asia countries. Therefore, this is the reason why the governments of Southeast Asia countries have realized the importance of energy transition for a very long time. But they don't have been able to implement it effectively. So on the one hand, the country should try to get rid of excessive dependence on the energy industry and accelerate the process of economic diversification. On the other hand, due to its weak development capacity, the economy diversification plan requires more foreign capital to settle in. And foreign capital will increase the demand for energy in turn. So from this perspective, while the NDC will certainly put greater pressure on the governments of Southeast Asia countries and other countries in Asia Pacific regions, it will also bring greater opportunities to policymakers and provide more convincing reasons to implement the energy transition. The government can transfer the implementation pressure to the policy formulation process, reduce those obstacles from those who have already gained vested interests. Also, the policymakers can accelerate the reform of domestic-related industries and guide foreign investments in certain areas. So I think that's my point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Loa. So just good to get some reflections around as we hear you say the crucial or the very much important about how the energy sectors are developed, because in fact they have to remain a cheap energy source for Asian countries to remain competitive and attracting the foreign direct investment to diversify. So really, as I hear you say, that the NDCs is an opportunity to accelerate this change that is needed for Asian countries to remain competitive. So thank you for your insights on that. I think it's a long discussion around energy transition in itself and attracting foreign direct investment, but good to get those perspectives. We can maybe pick up and discuss more about inter-regional cooperation as well. But before so, I would like to invite a very different perspective for this discussion, which is also very important, the perspective of the peoples of the region, because in fact, Asia Pacific is a very populated region, which is also an opportunity, but also a challenge. So we will turn to Myanmar to hear about opportunities for non-state actors to participate in and really drive ambition with regards to the NDC and climate action. And before inviting Mrs. Yi, I would like to invite just my colleague, Mr. Shun, who's head of climate and energy in the WWF Myanmar office, to just give us a quick status on a very special situation with regards to the NDC of Myanmar. So please, Mr. Shun.
Thank you, Ms. Trina. So hello, everybody. It's an honor. So as everybody knows, Myanmar is in a unique situation. But speaking of people, Myanmar also has been developing its NDC with multi-stakeholders, state and non-state actors. So myself and also a group of stakeholders have been technically supporting the development of the NDC. So we are the non-state actors, and we've been supporting the previous administration or government to develop the NDC. Just to be clear, we have been technically supporting till the end of last year, December 2020. And we actually, to our knowledge, the final version of the NDC is completed, and actually it is pending for the approval before the submission. But because of the slight political conflicts in the country, so the NDC has not been submitted. So we also felt it is more important to hear what people of Myanmar actually wants, because the NDC represent the people. Just to give everybody a bit of a heads up, the Myanmar NDC is slightly ambitious. So the conditional targets include higher percentage, almost 50% of the original renewable energy, and also decreasing coal up to 73% in the conditional scenario based on the original plan. So I'll put a stop it there.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shun. It's good to hear that there is a lot of ambition, even though a revised NDC has not officially been submitted. And a lot of that ambition comes from the people. So it's my pleasure. Please, Ms. EE, please share with us your thinking around how civil society and non-state actors can support the NDC development process. Yeah, the floor is yours, please, Mrs. Ayai.
Thank you. I hope everyone can see the screen share now, no? Okay. I'm going to talk about the indigenous people role and rights in the NDC, no? As part of my presentation. And first, I would like to highlight what role can indigenous people play as part of contributing to climate change response, especially in the NDC. Indigenous people are the one who has rich knowledge on the natural environment, especially forest, which is like the supermarket for them, and the place where is their home and where they settle. And the forests are also very much important for the mitigation of climate change. So they are the stewardship of those forests, the way they live along with the forest, and everything that the knowledge they have it, no, are the important contribution for NDC. And these are one example. I'm a Karen, and this is the Karen, one of the knowledge of Karen people in terms of adaptation. Means that since the beginning, the Karen people believe that if there is a river like the shape of a snake, people should not build a house there. Means that if we look at from today's time, means that there can have erosion and other things. There's, instead of people settlement, there should have more watershed area, things like that. No, these are the knowledge. And here in Karen language, it's written like 13 topic that they possess different knowledge related to climate change. So like those knowledge can be part of the climate change adaptation and mitigation response contributed by indigenous people all over the world, as well as in Myanmar. Indigenous people are the ones strongly connected with biodiversity, and their knowledge also depend on the biodiversity as well. Here are some of the examples of traditional medicine, which is available from the natural forest and the biodiversity. So if we no longer have the forest or biodiversity, and if everything depleted and deforested, indigenous people knowledge can be lost, as well as climate change problem will increase as well. The core element of indigenous knowledge are in daily living. It can be, it is used for healing. It is linked to social and also environment, livelihood, spiritual, even the governance and guidance in decision making. And it's also constantly evolving, especially in times of dynamic, natural environment and the changes happening nowadays. If we look at to the human rights framework linked to NDC, as well as indigenous people knowledge, that in Myanmar we have copyright law, and there is a place that traditional culture expression and patent protection. In Myanmar NDC, indigenous technology, and now With the latest version of NDC, although it is not submitted yet, there are more space for indigenous people participation and also indigenous conserved area recognition, things like that. We don't know what will happen with the future of changes with the country in the future, but these are the good step forward as part of NDC in our country. And Nagoya Protocol, which is under CBD, is also developing in our country. However, there is a lack of, it is similar to most Asian countries, there is a lack of recognition of indigenous people as such and indigenous knowledge. Therefore, we indigenous people have to find a channel how to engage in those different processes. We already got to engage in the UNFCCC process, especially local community and indigenous people platform, which is recently coming up after Paris Agreement. And I want to give some example how indigenous people can link up NDC, SDG to their roles if they can have improve of their rights. No, and as I already mentioned, in forest, they are the forest stewardship. Instead of a central governance approach, if we can have more decentralized approach and recognition of indigenous conserved area, there we can protect more forest area of the country. And also customary land tenure recognition. Actually, our country is in the middle of developing new land law. In that new land law, there are discussion on customary land tenure, but we are not yet sure of what will happen next in the country. In the energy sector, also indigenous people, they live closest to the natural environment, and like those renewable energy and energy and asset to electricity can be linked up with the way they live with the natural environment as well. And in disaster risk reduction, we need to have like an early warning system. Indigenous people way of understanding on nature and early warning as well are documented in different part of the world. And also some of those early warning systems should include like indigenous language so that they understand in a timely manner. And like there are like seed bank and indigenous people, they are the one in their shifting cultivation area, they can conserve most of the seed, no, which are going to deplete or extend, no. So like those recognition and role for indigenous people can improve the conservation of biodiversity as well. These are the things that we see as both rights. And as for the right aspect, we would like to highly mention about the securing customary tenure right, because customary land tenure is very much important for indigenous people in the country to get recognition. And without that, there will not have a proper way of protecting and conservation of natural forests and environment that indigenous people settled in. And this is also highlighted in 2019 IPCC special report on climate change and land, that securing customary land tenure is very much important. And we are actually advocating on that in the country to have more recognition. And as for NDC, gender, as an indigenous woman, I would like to highlight the gender, because it's not only social barrier, it's also culturally, there is a more barrier. We have done some study and we already experience a lot that gender balance and gender equality is important, and to overcome some of the barrier existed in the society for as part of climate change response as well. So, because women, they know what happened in their daily life, they cannot access more water, things like that, but their voices are very much limited until now. And reduce inequality is also in SDG target. So these things should pay attention as part of NDC. peace, justice, and strong institution, I would like to highlight it is also in SDG, and in our NDC, like a very much dynamic country like in our country, there should have inclusion of consideration on those part. And after all, meaningful participation is the key to us have a successful implementation of the NDC, because NDC should be implemented in the country after it come up with a good approach and after it is submitted. So indigenous people are there. We would like to have ethical engagement, and we would like to play an important role, and we would like to get a recognition on our role and rights as well. So we want that the country should implement all UNFCCC decisions related to indigenous people, and also recognize indigenous people as partner in the protection of biodiversity and climate action. And since there is international level under UNFCCC, the establishment of indigenous people climate platform, we would like to see it at the national and local level as well, so that there is like a real lively and active engagement happening on the ground. And we would like, here we say revise and implement, but it's already revised now. So we would like to implement NDC with full participation of indigenous people, including women and youth and person with disability. And the key for us is the indigenous knowledge, our customary land right and governance system to be part of climate strategy, action plan, and all the development of climate related policy and actual implementation. So for more information related to indigenous knowledge and people in Asia, here is the link. And I want to say thank you in my language, W. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EE, for sharing your perspectives and also the very elaborate thinking, I would say, and very specific recommendations on how can we include and what could be the role of indigenous peoples in relation to the NDC, and in particular even to the specific sectors within the NDC. I think from your presentation, it becomes very clear that there is a very key role for IPs to play and local communities to play in delivering and setting ambition, but also very much important implementing the NDCs in general. And then you highlight one point, which I think everybody's taking forward, also about the importance of rights, tenure rights, I think access rights or user rights of these natural resources. So with your presentation, we get a very strong focus on what is also termed nature-based solutions, or the role of nature in delivering the NDCs. And so thank you for also highlighting, that perspective. That is, of course, a perspective that is very close to the heart of WWF. And we see also from the very beginning of the session today, the event today, that from Fiji, they have included now the ocean sector as an important sector in the NDC. So thank you, EE, for your input. I would actually like to, there's been different questions in the chat. I think all the speakers can read them, and even Jerome has been proactive and is starting to answer some of the questions. I would like to ask you, Jerome, maybe to elaborate a little bit in terms of implementation, since you're now moving into implementation with your revised NDC already submitted. So at subnational level, maybe you could just briefly say a little bit about how will you go about it? How will the financing come to the subnational level? And how will you involve local communities and indigenous peoples where relevant in that next step, the subnational implementation of the NDC? If you could just share a few thoughts. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Briefly, during our deep dive session this morning, the expanded NDC technical working group, and that's consisting of so many agencies, roughly the entire cabinet, so to speak, and that includes the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, and of course anti-poverty agencies, of course, and the youth sector. We call them reference groups that should inform the government process, exchange feedback on the progression of the development of the policies and measures. We articulated the specific opportunities that agencies should articulate in the list of our policies and measures. The first is on the quantifiable mitigation potential. Now, this is very important because we're looking at the scaling up of technologies from national to local, subnational levels, because technologies are supposed to be deployed where they are necessary. In the case of the Philippines, they will no longer, they are not supposed to be all in the Metro Manila. So we're looking at really the countryside where technologies for agriculture, for energy, especially the off-grid ones, including those that will affect nature-based solutions. That's also important. After the quantifiable mitigation potential, we look at number 2, our capacity to cost the policies and measures of the technologies. Now, we're looking at the specific needs, and those are grassroots data. Now, when we say mitigation or adaptation measure, we're looking at localized data. And so this is our entry point to really make sure to be legitimate and valid that our measure is really coming from the bottom level of analysis. That's the unit of analysis. Of course, when we say adaptation solution like sea level rise gauges or tidal gauges, we need to be on the ground. And the pandemic situation is a challenge because it will require us to be more prudent in our movement. So that's the second, how to cost. So that will inform the scale and the number of technologies that we have to be deployed. And then the third is on the capacity building of the institutions that will support the NDC over a long term. While our NDC is capped at 2030, we are mindful that we have to project the scenarios post 2030 up to the 2050, especially when we try to galvanize our industry, say with clean energy towards net zero, for example. These are the details that agencies will be putting up in a matrix. Now, one of the columns would be the entry points of all these sectors in those strategic policies and measures in the various sectors and their linkage to SDGs. Now, we cannot succeed in SDGs nor in NDCs if the ultimate test of our effectiveness in terms of NDC would be the growth that we can measure, say, cities, coastal municipalities that cannot demonstrate any progress, whether it be in livelihoods, whether it be in resilience infrastructure. Now, let me just put into context directly on the core value of WWF. We have in our NDC organogram the interplay of local government units, the civil societies, the youth, the gender groups, indigenous peoples, and even trade unions, because we are informed of the trade-offs that can come our way. So the dialogue must be something like transparent and looking forward, and it espouses prioritization of needs to make sure that competing interests with the, let's be practical, with the country sources that we can domestically mobilize, plus the challenge of mobilizing support from international financial mechanism. It doesn't mean that the Philippines will stop advancing climate change work. We have to do some contingent measures, and we will need WWF to make sure that, you know, the aspects of nature-based solutions are also optimized. Our NDC is very clear on adaptation solutions to make sure that over time we minimize, address, or avert loss and damage, so that really it's not just about surviving the threats of increasing global warming, but we have to make our contribution to avoid future emissions given our national circumstances, but at the same time make our people prosperous through these investments. Green jobs, for example, optimization of the tourism enterprises to be nature-based and organic in their approach. Now, on the green recovery, Attorney Iba, if I may refer to her, she's a close reference for Philippine climate change action. She knows that under Executive Order 174 on greenhouse gases, there are only 4 calculating agencies: our Ministry of Environment, Agriculture, Transportation, and Energy. But this regime of NDC implementation, we are adding 3. The Ministry of Public Works, to make sure that our infrastructure is climate sensitive. Number 2, the Department of Health or the Ministry of Health should be on board to inform our transition in terms of health infrastructure, including waste management and energy efficient healthcare system. And then the third will be our Ministry of Tourism or the Department of Tourism, because we want to influence the countryside growth, and nature-based solution in the context of tourism enterprise will be both beautiful and safe. And so this is our strategy to galvanize people's support towards advancing our NDC. I hope this helps. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Jerome. I think you have so rich experience from the Philippines, and I can see you also invited participants to connect with you for further exchange. So I hope we can share also for your contact details for that. We're actually coming close to the hour. Even there are many questions also in the chat box. I don't know if Mr. EE or Dr. Lua would like to come in for a final remark. It could be on what you would like to see happen by COP26, or any key message that you feel you should share with the audience here or the participants around driving action in the Asia Pacific. So please feel free to share some final comments. 1 minute for each. Thank you. First, Mrs. Ai.
Yeah, for me, I got the question and I already answered it. Being a latecomer in the ASEAN, especially in Asia, to respond to climate change, we can learn from other countries. We can avoid the mistake of other countries. We can learn the best option from other countries to choose the option for our country. That's one of the benefits for us all being the latecomer. The inclusive participation and inclusive growth is very much important, like our country with so many tragic things happening. So that's my answer and my point for the last. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, EE. I think that's a good point. The importance of people and especially in challenging political times. So thank you for your contribution. Dr. Lua, 1 minute left for you.
Okay, thank you. So in short, maybe someone would say the establishment of cooperation mechanism is the key for the regional cooperation. But nowadays, you can see there are many difficulties during the energy transition cooperation. For example, the flexible cooperation mechanism is insufficiently binding. The participation of enterprises is not enough, and economic cooperation is not balanced. So in my opinion, I think the most important thing is to strengthen the role of government itself from each countries. We can use the bottom-up strategy to make the countries to achieve the goals of regional cooperation. And then the last but not the least, governments of all countries need to strengthen their cooperation with other stakeholders like the enterprises. I mean, not only the large-scale enterprises, but also the small, medium-scale enterprises. And also, as Mr. Legan and other speakers said, we should push forward the cooperation with the local officials and individuals, the civil society, and so on. Yeah, that's my point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Luan. Thank you to all the presenters, and thank you to all the participants. WWF for sure will continue to be a partner in establishing and supporting establishment of regional cooperation, support to subnational levels, implementation of nature-based solutions, and not the least supporting of course, the role of non-state actors or civil society, and in particular indigenous peoples. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the continued work in driving a vision and implementation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your opinions. Thank you.